Welcome to My Body, My Pod, a reproductive freedom podcast. I'm your host, Timmaraju, president of Reproductive Freedom for All. Today, we're joined by a true reproductive freedom champion, Congresswoman Diana DeGette of Colorado's 1st Congressional District. She's also the co-chair of the Congressional Reproductive Freedom Caucus. For decades, Congresswoman DeGette has been one of the movement's fiercest advocates, fighting to protect abortion rights, defend patients' rights, and push back against attacks on our fundamental freedoms. And we're recording this conversation just before the 4th anniversary of the Dobbs decision, the ruling that ripped away a constitutional right and unleashed the biggest attack on reproductive freedom in a generation. 4 years later, anti-abortion politicians continue to push bans and restrictions while over and over, voters continue to push back. Election after election, Americans have made clear that they do not want politicians making decisions about their bodies, their families, or their futures. And today, we're going to talk about all of it and why this moment calls for leaders like Diana DeGette, who won't just say they're with us, but who have a proven record of standing up, speaking out, and fighting for our freedoms and getting shit done. Congresswoman DeGette, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get into it.
Okay.
It's so good
Thank
to see
you for having me. I'm glad to see you.
It's so good to see you. And I only get to see you on the Hill. So this is fun. We get to be off campus and talk about some other things.
Right. Now we're in the studio.
We're in the studio at the DNC. And thanks to our friends at the DNC for being so generous with their space. I want to talk to you about your record and your leadership because you have been doing this work for so long, from your time in the Colorado legislature. You go way, way back. And, you and I have had some conversations about how you got started in this movement.
Yes, well, I was a volunteer with Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains way back when, and even when I was a lawyer practicing law. So when I got elected to the Colorado legislature, in those days, Colorado still was Republican.
Right.
And so...
Hard to believe now, but yeah.
I mean, it was. And
yeah.
So I decided, I was this young, crusading state legislator. I decided
How old were you when you got elected to the legislature?
I was 36.
Wow.
And so I decided I wanted to make a statement and pass a bill for reproductive rights. In Colorado, many years before, several decades before, Governor Richard Lamb, when he was in the legislature, had actually passed one of the first laws in the country giving people abortion rights. Colorado was really ahead all the time. So I got to the legislature, and working with all of the groups, we decided that the biggest issue that we had then, and sorry to say we have it now again, was protesters trying to stop people from going in and out of abortion clinics. And so
still a huge issue that we're fighting.
Still a huge issue. Some of these things never go away. Mm-hmm. And what these protesters would do, they would get up into people's faces, they would spit on them, they would, and
intimidate them.
These are people who are at the most vulnerable stage of their life, right? They're making this tough decision, they're getting this medical treatment. So I wrote this bill, and I'm trained as a constitutional lawyer. So I wanted to write a bill that would both protect the patients going in, but also people's First Amendment right to protest. Because for one thing, I believe in the First Amendment,
right,
unlike some of my Republican colleagues today, but also because I wanted it to be upheld by the courts. I actually wanted to do something for these patients.
You wanted it to be durable.
Right. So I worked with my friend Mike Feely, who was I called him my Senate sponsor, and we crafted this bill where there was a bubble 8 feet around patients going into healthcare clinics. And because we figured that would be close enough to where someone could communicate their position, but far enough away to give a buffer to the patient.
Like a physical buffer to protect them.
Right. Put your arm out, 2 arm lengths away,
Perfect.
8 feet. So we somehow passed this bill through the Republican legislature, Republican House, Republican Senate.
Do you remember what year that was?
It was 1993.
So that was honestly before this issue became so incredibly partisan. And we had a lot of West Coast Republicans who were pro-choice or pro-freedom back then.
Well, so I sold this as a common sense, not abortion.
Compromise.
But no, it wasn't it was like just preserving calm at healthcare clinics. That's how I sold it. And there were the Democrats were only in the minority by 2 votes. So there were 2 Republicans who were lawyers. And I convinced them that this was constitutional. So they voted for it. And then the cards just fell. And and it passed overwhelmingly.
Amazing.
And then Governor Romer signed it into law. And then it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I went to the oral argument. I was still am, a member of the Supreme Court bar. So I was sitting there in the front row, and everybody.
And you were like in your early mid-30s?
By then I was in Congress.
Oh, wow.
So by the time.
So you rose pretty fast.
Yeah, I was in the state legislature 4 years.
Oh, my gosh.
And then Pat Schroeder, the iconic Pat Schroeder, retired. And then I was in Congress, and my bill goes to the Supreme Court. So I walked over across the street and went to the argument. And people were saying, "Oh my God, I think they're going to lose." I'm like, and still in the Supreme Court, I'm going, I think this is a reasonable compromise. These people can talk. These people can get health care.
Right.
And so I'll never forget. I was on the House floor voting, and my chief of staff called me, and she goes, "You were affirmed 6-3. And I started jumping up and down, and my colleagues were going, "What happened? What happened?" I'm like, my bill just got affirmed by the Supreme Court. And of course, they had no idea what I was talking about.
And you were so far ahead in Colorado than Congress in that moment.
Oh, yeah. Congress had passed a clinic access bill, but it was a much weaker bill. And so.
Was that the FACE Act?
Yeah. So anyway, then after that, other states tried to do other things, and the bubble bill has been upheld 2 more times by the Supreme Court. So anyway, that's a long story of how I got involved with this. When I got to Congress, I immediately got involved in trying to protect reproductive rights, and it's really fraught in Congress because the anti-abortion people have so many levers that they try to pull to restrict people's access, not just to abortion, but also to birth control.
Right.
It's peppered.
And we're seeing a resurgence in that.
Oh, totally, because maybe people will start believing me now. I don't know. They not only want to ban all abortions, they want to ban almost all forms of birth control.
Correct. And that goes back to their ideology, right? That goes back, what I always try to explain to people is they're true believers.
Right.
I know some Republicans are political, it's politically convenient to align themselves with antis, but the anti-abortion movement are true believers, and they believe life begins at conception.
Right. And they believe that if you get pregnant, it's God's will and you have the baby.
Right.
And
they believe that maybe women shouldn't be in the workforce. And we're seeing a resurgence in that too.
They believe women shouldn't be in the workforce. They believe that in a marriage, the man is the boss, and they believe each household should only have 1 vote. I mean,
that's so important because of all the fight you had to have around the SAVE Act. Like, this is not just a small group of ideological lunatics. This is in their blueprint. This is in Project 2025.
Correct.
So this extremist group has taken over the mainstream GOP, and they've made an unholy alliance with Donald Trump and the MAGA movement.
Well, and Donald Trump, before he was elected president, he was not particularly anti-abortion, but he realized this is where his bread was buttered, and so he's just gone along with it the whole time.
To the demise of Roe.
Right. Right.
So you were saying just now, I want to dig into it, that Congress is a tough place, and you talked about the antis. But you've had some challenges moving the Democratic caucus too, and you've done it very successfully, but over a course of time. Can you talk about the evolution of Democrats on this issue?
Yes, I will. So when I first came to Congress in 1996, there were 30 anti-choice Democrats, 30 anti-choice Democrats.
Wow.
And people say to me all the time, why didn't you codify Roe versus Wade years ago?
Well, this is why.
Well, number one, because it was Supreme Court precedent.
Right.
And so even people who believed in abortion rights were like, yeah, why should we pick this fight?
It's
already
strong.
the law.
Every justice who's testified in front of Congress has said they would uphold this precedent.
Correct. And so even people who agree with us were like, well, we don't want to do this.
We don't need to do this.
But then there were 30 people who did not believe that in abortion. And so two things happened over the years. The first thing that happened was that the electorate moved. Most of the anti-choice Democrats were from heavily Catholic districts in the Northeast and also in parts of the South and in Texas, places like that.
Yeah.
And over the years, voters' views on abortion began to change.
Right.
And so that put pressure from the electorate on the members of Congress. But then also people started to see some of the really ghastly medical results that we were seeing with people who had terrible tragedies happen late in pregnancy and were stuck and this. So they began to think this through on their own. And I spent over the years a lot of time very gently talking to my colleagues and saying, why is this something that Congress should be legislating on? You know, if somebody has a religious objection to having an abortion, we shouldn't be making them have an abortion.
And there's nothing
and it should be their decision.
And there's nothing in Roe v. Wade or in any of the law that would make anybody have an abortion. It gives them the freedom to decide if they want to have an abortion.
Exactly right.
And that should be something regardless of political parties, and that folks support, and we are now in that moment. I think this is a great example of an inside-outside strategy, because when you talk about the electorate, it wasn't by accident, right? So many of our organizations were endorsing candidates finally, like creating C4s and PACs, like building political momentum for folks who were reproductive rights champions. And you were on the inside saying, hey, let me point this out to you. You got here in part because of these votes. Now you need to understand what we have to do. And then you were pushing them to do things.
Right, exactly. And now where we are in elections is after the terrible Dobbs decision that reversed Roe, the American public has now suddenly woken up and realized this is a threat to healthcare, Americans' healthcare. It's a health issue. And a huge majority of Americans now support abortion rights.
Right.
And so first it was like, well, you know, we need to get you to not vote for additional restrictions to abortion. And where we are now is when the Democrats take the majority in November, I'm going to do what I did with Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, I want to hear.
We'll talk about that. But I've already talked to Hakeem Jeffries and said, I would like to see our bill to reinstate abortion rights nationwide on the floor, one of the first priorities. And so I think that'll pass. Then we have to try to figure out how to get it through the Senate. But then the other issue is the Hyde Amendment.
Yes. And Colorado is, again, ahead of the curve, ahead of this country when it comes to Hyde.
Yes. We just passed a constitutional...
Huge.
All the way back from the bubble bill to now.
Colorado's leading the way. And it's sort of the template for how other states can tackle this issue.
Right. And so now we have a constitutional amendment that says health care is a right, including abortion, and Colorado funds can be used for those health care services.
So that means the Hyde Amendment, which is a restriction on federal funds, you know, the state removed the restriction on state funds.
Correct.
And that's what we want to do at the national level, and you've been working so hard on this.
And that was even tougher than putting abortion rights into...
Right. It's about taxpayers.
It's about... A lot of people for many years would say, well, I'm pro-choice, but I don't see why people should have to pay for abortions with their tax dollars.
Right.
And I would say, well, you know, some of my constituents don't want to pay for military spending with their tax dollars, but we don't exempt them.
That's such a great argument.
And, you know, there's lots of things we might not want to pay for with our tax dollars, but it's America. This is how it works. Anyway, we were then able to, when President Biden was there, and the last time the Democrats had the majority, we actually passed what we call clean appropriations bills, which means we passed appropriations bills without the Hyde Amendment for the first time.
This is so important because when President Biden was up for re-election, and I was out there talking about his accomplishments, people would question whether or not he was pro-choice. And I think a lot of it was his history. He was one of those Catholic Democrats who evolved, right?
100%.
He's exactly the example. He was in the House, he was in the Senate. Where he was when he started to where he was when he ended were two dramatically different things. He's the case study of the story you were talking about, of the evolution from the 90s to now. And he removed the Hyde Amendment. I mean, he supported removal of the Hyde Amendment, Hyde restrictions in the federal budget. And that was the first time, and that was post-Dobbs. And that's a big deal that I don't think gets celebrated enough.
I completely agree. And a lot of those people, like President Biden and others, they really went through a deep moral analysis with themselves to come up with this. And you've got to admire that.
You do.
But here's the thing about the Hyde Amendment, and I say this to people all the time. What the Hyde Amendment says is people on Medicaid, so poor people cannot get abortions. So rich people or people who have insurance, they can get abortions. But the people who are the most vulnerable, the least financially able to take care of this, they're the ones we cut out.
They're the ones we're going to punish.
They're the ones we're going to punish. And then after they have children, then we're not going to support them by giving them child care or nutrition or adequate schooling or housing or any of that. It's really cruel.
It's cruel, and it makes the case, something you and I have talked about before, that reproductive freedom and abortion access are actually also affordability issues, right? We have a lot of folks right now saying, well, we need to talk more about affordability and less about repro. And I think any woman who's had a child is like, well, actually, these are the same things, because the most significant economic decision you will make in your lifetime is whether or not to have a child. Are we forcing folks to have children by removing access? And a right in and of itself means nothing without access. And that's what the Hyde Amendment is about. It's about the affordability to make choices, but it's also about the means to have that choice.
Yes, and also the implication of Dobbs. So it's the Hyde Amendment saying poor women on Medicaid can't get the funds they need for abortions. But then you add that to Dobbs. So if they live in a state that has banned abortion and talk about affordability, then you're telling them somehow they have to find the way to get the services they need by going to a different state or by somehow trying to get medication abortion, something.
Which is also under attack.
And so what you're doing is you're putting this huge burden on the most vulnerable people in our society.
It's such an important point. And I think it goes to, again, the power of the movement, in that we've now seen a proliferation of abortion funds, right? Volunteer-driven organizations that are raising money to meet the gap that the government should be and our taxpayer dollars should be covering, right? Why should we all be giving $5 to $10 to abortion funds to get somebody from point A to point B, or to get abortion pills into states? There's so much mutual aid that's happening, and I'm so proud of our colleagues, the folks you and I both work with in the movement. But it's shameful.
It is shameful. It's shameful, and it's retrograde.
Right.
But it's also makes abortion sort of an afterthought of healthcare rather than
putting it in
part of the whole ethos of healthcare. I mean, it should be just part of healthcare.
General OBGYN care, not standalone care.
Right.
And that's partially why even medical schools are suffering. We're not seeing enough doctors trained in this, because I've met so many abortion providers who've told me stories that I went to my OBGYN residency and then I had to go to a Planned Parenthood clinic to learn how to do an abortion. I was doing my residency at a top hospital with specialty in obstetrics and gynecology. But to learn abortion care, I had to leave the hospital and go to a specialized clinic.
Right.
What other procedure requires that?
Right. I know.
It's crazy.
I know.
It's so disturbing. I want to come back to Dobbs because we're going to air this episode shortly after Dobbs. And I think what you did, I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, but what you did post-Dobbs, immediately jumping into action, I think is a lesson for why we need seasoned leaders in Congress. You are up for re-election. You have a challenger. Actually, maybe you have more than one challenger. And I think that your seniority, your experience, your relationships, what you've been building with this caucus in terms of this reproductive freedom majority in Congress is going to be critical to what you just talked about, which is when Hakeem Jeffries becomes speaker, and he will because of the work you're doing and we're all doing to support you, we need to have leadership to move legislation to move as quickly as possible. You have a really interesting story about where you were when Dobbs came down and how you responded, and I want you to tell it.
Well, so we got wind that this might happen. Remember, the decision was leaked.
Yes.
So we thought it might come down. So Barbara Lee, who was my co-chair of the Reproductive Freedom
iconic Barbara Lee,
the iconic Barbara
now
Lee,
mayor of Oakland,
right? Barbara and I decided we better get our votes together to put Roe versus Wade into statute.
Yeah,
immediately. The Women's Health Protection Act, because we knew it was coming. So as I said, we had never had this vote on the House floor before because people said, "Oh, we don't need to do it," and blah blah.
But the leak provided
and we hadn't had the votes.
Yeah.
So Barbara and I went around for about 3 months, and we literally counted all the votes.
So I'm assuming that was like when the oral arguments happened, between the oral arguments.
It was when the opinion was
the
draft opinion was
okay.
leaked.
When the leak happened
So we went around and we got all the votes lined up. And I had worked with Nancy, Speaker Pelosi. I had worked with her on a lot of other issues because I love to count votes and whip. So
I just want to repeat that. You love to count votes and whip.
I do.
Feel like that is an underrated skill and passion for somebody in leadership in Congress, but it's the game.
Guess what? If you don't have the votes,
it doesn't
you
matter.
don't pass the bill. If you don't have the votes,
you don't have the votes, you don't pass the bill.
Correct.
Let's put it on a t-shirt.
That's why I like to whip. And so I had the votes all lined up. And Nancy knew, because I had worked with her on a lot of really edgy bills, that if I said I had the votes, I had the votes. So so Dobbs came down that night. I called her on her cell phone and I said, "Hi, Nancy, it's Diana. Listen, Dobbs came down. I am telling you, we have the votes to pass the Women's Health Protection Act. I'm asking you to put it on the floor next week." And she
Which
said,
was the legislation that would have restored abortion rights in all 50 states.
Correct. So she said, "You say you've got the votes?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "Okay, I'll put it on." And then the next week we had it on the floor, and lo, we had the votes, and then we passed the bill. And then we passed the bill a second time later, and both times it got stuck in the Senate. So now what I'm doing is I'm teeing it up, as I said, to be one of the first pieces of legislation we pass when the Democrats take the majority. And then I'm hoping we'll take the majority in the Senate. And we're working with our advocates and with groups like yours to figure out
the strategy
in the Senate.
Yeah.
But so you ask, why is it important to have that level of experience? Because almost everybody in the Democratic caucus right now is pro-abortion rights.
I think you have two holdouts.
We have,
and they're Catholics from
like
Texas.
1.5.
1.5. Okay.
Yeah.
1.5.
One of them.
We'll talk about that later. Yeah. How do we get that half to a full?
But my point is, everybody coming into Congress now
is going to have to be
for abortion rights.
Right.
But I'm going to guarantee you a brand new member of Congress who just got here, who's never even been a legislator, the Speaker of the House is not if they call up the Speaker of the House and say, I need you to put this abortion rights bill on the floor next week, I'm going to guarantee you they're not going to do it based on that. And that's really it's that, but it's also having the experience and leadership to see all the legislation as it comes through and see all the sneaky ways that anti-abortion people are trying to restrict people's rights. You've
seen it. You've seen every play in the playbook from these folks.
And they play it. They run those plays over and over again.
That's right. Yeah.
When we were trying to get the tax credits for the ACA restored,
yes,
they tried to sneak in the middle of the night. They tried to sneak an amendment in there that would have stopped anybody in the exchanges with insurance from getting abortion coverage.
Effectively extending the Hyde Amendment to private insurance.
Correct. To everybody.
Which would have been a disaster.
It would have basically banned any kind of insurance coverage for abortion in this country. And they just tried to sneak it in the middle of the night. But luckily, I had seen that play before. And
absolutely.
So we raised the concern and it was dealt with.
And what I think is fascinating about this is you were a young member of Congress. You understand the need for generational shifts and change, but at the same time, we also have to maintain leadership and champions to finish the job.
Well, and I think you need both.
Right.
I think you need the experience and championship, but then those people need to bring junior members of Congress
along,
and so that when I leave, I can be assured. So Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts is now my co-chair.
Yes, so
of
important.
The Reproductive Freedom Caucus,
and most of the officers of the Reproductive Freedom Caucus, your colleagues who are running the caucus with you, are all younger generation members of Congress,
and that is with intent.
Yeah,
because it can't just be whole bunch of older senior members. It has to be junior, younger members too, and we have to collectively do that. And
it's not really about age to me. It's about the ability to get shit done. And I don't remember anyone talking about Nancy Pelosi's age because she got shit done.
Yeah,
and you are one of those folks who, I don't know if you've heard this, but it's so funny to me that you talked about whipping votes and it being your passion, but your reputation is you go to Diana DeGette if you want to get shit done. Yeah. She can pass a bill.
That's a reputation I cherish because that's why I came to Congress. I came to Congress to improve people's lives through legislation.
Yeah.
But you're not going to do that if you can't pass the bill.
Right.
So, and that's also...
And this is the most important bill. Selfishly, I'm going to say this is the most important legislation that we have to emergency pass. This is the cause of our lifetime.
This is, for my little granddaughter.
Right.
She has less reproductive rights than I had.
And you didn't come into this business thinking that was ever going to be the case.
No, we thought it was, and what's really crazy about this is it's the American people agree with us. It's just a tiny little group of religious zealots that are controlling a lot of levers of power. And so really, yes, women, but all Americans. If all Americans just stand up and say, this is our healthcare right, and continue to do this election after election, we will get to where we need to be.
I love that. And I think that's a really important message of hope because, as I travel and I campaign, and I know you've been doing the same, I hear from a lot of activists, a lot of our supporters, feeling really hopeless about the onslaught against abortion rights, but also all of our fundamental freedoms, democracy writ large, right? And it's hard to feel optimistic that elections can fix this when they're watching the news, they're paying attention, and they're seeing so many losses. So what gives you hope that we can do that?
Well, what gives me hope is the citizens.
Yeah.
Because, when Donald Trump first won again, we were all horrified. But I said the citizens are really going to be the ones that rise up. It's really, I say three things: the Congress, the courts, and the citizens. Well, the Congress now, the Democrats have been really, really pushing, and we're now beginning to win because Donald Trump's favorability is so low.
And Republicans are crossing over.
We're getting Republican crossover now because they see the tea leaves. But then the courts, I mean, this is why we have the system that we have. Much of what Donald Trump has done is illegal. I would say most of what he's done. And so the lawsuits, we have a litigation task force in Congress.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm part of it. And we also, by the way.
Well, as a litigator.
Yeah. And we've been filing amicus briefs and doing a lot of work. And I found out the other day, 80% of the lawsuits we have won against him, not just on repro, but on everything. But then there's the citizens and all of the King's rallies and the voting that they've done and everything.
All these special elections,
everything
that we've been winning consistently,
is showing that Americans are waking up and they realize the power that they have. And so November is going to be really critical. But then beyond that, into 2028, people are going to have to step up.
You talked about Congress, and then you talked about the courts. So I want to ask one more question about Congress and then get to the courts briefly. Congress, we get the plan in the House. The Senate, you and I have talked about challenges in the Senate. Some of it's procedural. How do we get past the 60 vote requirement threshold to pass abortion legislation? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a couple thoughts I have. Some people have some very creative ways to deal with the filibuster. And some people think the filibuster should just be eliminated.
Right.
There's pros and cons to that. Obviously, the cons are when the Republicans come back, they'll just ban abortion again. So we have to think about, do we want to eliminate the filibuster? There's the talking filibuster, which would be actually a useful tool in something like this, because it would force them to stand up
and talk
about their extreme views and horrify Americans. But then there's a more fundamental issue too, and it's not just with abortion rights, it's with voting rights and other core democratic rights.
Right.
You could write the Senate rule so you didn't just abandon the filibuster, but for core rights, for healthcare rights, voting rights, things like that, you could have just a 50-vote rule.
And abortion would fit in there because it's a constitutional fundamental right, freedom.
Right.
So yes, and then I think the proponents of eliminating the filibuster would say that if Republicans start passing a bunch of terribly unpopular bills like an abortion ban, we can hold them accountable because now they're out there doing it. And I don't know, does John Thune really want his caucus taking those votes?
Well, I know. So that's a good point.
There's lots of different ways for us to tackle it.
Yeah, what I advocate is being able to codify abortion rights.
Right, whatever we have to do to get there.
Over in the House, we love telling the Senate what to do, and
does that work?
we do believe we're the superior body, but it doesn't ever work for some reason because
I'm shocked.
They're the Senate.
They're the Senate.
And so however they figure it out, as long as it enables us to get these core rights, and it's not just abortion rights, but voting rights and others.
But I think going to the citizens that you said Congress, courts, and the citizens, if the Senate doesn't, if you pass establishing the right to abortion in all 50 states, eliminating the Hyde Amendment, if you do these big things in the House and the Senate doesn't, with a majority, it will create a big problem for them with the citizens.
A big problem. And ultimately, that's the core foundation of our democracy, the people.
Let me ask you about the courts real quick before we run out of time. Where do you stand on court reform? I mean, this court is so dangerous. We've seen complete decimation of so many rights where they've been a little bit better about keeping the lower courts, Trump in check. We've seen voting rights tragically decimated. We've seen abortion rights. To your point, these are the core freedoms that we should be finding carve-outs for with any kind of rules reform in the Senate. What's your take on how we fix the courts and Congress's role in fixing the courts?
To fix the courts, I think you'd have to look at amending the Constitution. But you also might be able to fix it in some procedural ways. And some people have suggested term limits. I think that if you could settle on a good term, I think that might be really a plausible way. Another way you might be able to do it is by opening up the ethics. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's ridiculous.
There's no code of ethics in the Supreme Court.
There's no code
Wild.
of ethics in the Supreme Court. What's the worst thing is they're ideologically motivated. Stephen Miller and all of those Svengalis who are behind Donald Trump, they've been planning this for decades.
That's right.
They've been planning this ultra right-wing taking of the court. And this is what we're seeing now in decision after decision, in the abortion rights decisions, in the voting rights decisions, all of those decisions. And as long as this court stays like it is, it's going to take a generation to undo these blatantly political decisions by the court. And that's why people are looking at different scenarios where we could break this logjam. One is term limits for the court, if we could agree on that. One is instituting some kind of sunlight in the process. So you have ethics rules. So you see, and again, if people could see Clarence Thomas spending all of his free time with these ultra-wealthy right-wing reactionaries, that would, I think, change.
Yeah, he was forced to report it, and we could actually, show the American people what's happening.
Or even if he was forced to not do it.
Right. Oh, that's even better.
I mean, under the congressional ethics codes, members of Congress can't go hang out in somebody's
private jet
or
you can't. Your staff can't even come to a reception with us without us clearing everything with ethics.
Right. Well, I mean, if you
which is I support.
I mean,
but there's more scrutiny on congressional staff than Clarence Thomas.
Yes, amen. There is.
That's unacceptable, and Congress can do something about it. And you, with your incredible talent at making things happen, you can do something about it.
Yeah. After we win the House, then maybe our litigation task force will turn its attention to really thinking about Supreme Court reform.
I think that it has to be all the things, right? It has to be, as you said, legislation, then protecting those rights through the courts, then making sure you laid it out, Congress, the courts, and citizens. That's it.
Yeah, and this is why I really do appreciate new people coming into Congress and wanting to come into Congress, but you have to have people who have been there.
That's right.
You have to have, and who are still
fighting. And who are proven.
Yeah.
Who've done the work.
Yeah.
And listen, we need you to finish the job.
Well, that's the thing. I need to finish the job. There's several jobs I have, and this is the biggest job, is protecting abortion rights. And it's not, we didn't even talk about this, birth control, too.
Yes. Well, you brought it up right on the top.
I mean,
that's a whole second podcast. We're going to talk about that. You're going to come back.
We can talk about birth control and medication abortion.
Yes, and then what's happening with the attacks, because, I mean, listen, even Plan B, right? The big fight we had to get Plan B into pharmacies.
Well, these guys don't understand the difference.
They also don't understand the medical. They don't understand
how
biology,
it works. Right?
How pregnant people get pregnant. Stay pregnant.
No,
that is
don't.
A fundamental. That's a whole other topic. They do not
understand that. No, I've had some very, very intimate conversations with some of my colleagues.
That feels uncomfortable.
And some of them are Republican men, and I'm like, wow, but they like me, so they hear me out.
That's important too.
Yeah.
You've got Republicans listening to you about how a pregnancy happens.
The education that I had over at Merrill Junior High School.
This is why sex ed is so important.
I am communicating that on the House floor to Republican men.
Well, if that's not public service, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly.
Congresswoman DeGette, thank you for being our champion. Thank you for all your incredible work. Thank you for joining us. And I look forward to working with you and Speaker Hakeem Jeffries in the new Congress to get this done, to get shit done.
Yeah, we're going to get it done.
Congresswoman DeGette, thank you for being here and for the work you do. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Remember, you matter and you have a role, an important role to play in this work. This moment is hard, but we cannot give up. Text POD, P-O-D, to 59791 to join us in this fight. Until next time.